Everybody, welcome to our money talk. This is Geremy and myself. We have our cup of chais, and we are just women who love to talk about money and talk about finances and learn from each other. And we're so passionate about women being boss ladies when it comes to our finances. So I'm going to introduce my friend Geremy. Take it away, Geremy. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Fantastic.
Awesome. Great.
So what are we're both in red because, Valentine's Day, and we both, obviously love, we love red, and Valentine's Day is coming up. What is something that you are wanting for us to sort of learn as we're especially as we're going into tax time and we're all into our papers and documents, hopefully opening up those files? What are some things that that were sort of on your mind?
Sure. So, we're still at the top of the year. So, if you're watching a replay of this, it may not be February 2023 anymore, but if it is, or even close to it, then, there are certain things that we should be thinking of at the beginning of the year. And with my tips and these chats that we're doing, what we're really trying to do is bring you information, maybe not necessarily that you haven't heard before, but that you haven't heard before specifically geared towards women. Because Sapna and I are all about helping out women. And so I think that us women, we always have our to-do list, our checklist, our beginning of the year goal setting session. We do our vision boards. We do all of that. And sometimes it could be maybe a little repetitive, or you're hearing kind of like this from the gurus out there, the same types of goals that you should be setting for yourself. So to kind of move away from that, I'd rather give you some practical things that you could be doing at the beginning of the year to make your life a little bit easier when it comes to your finances. And so we're going to do something a little different today, Sapna, and the topic actually is going to be on what types of things you should be thinking about with your finances that you don't do every day or every week or every month, like budgeting. So I'm talking about beneficiary designations.
Yeah.
That's a good way to start out your year. You only do that once a year. And so that's what I want to put on your minds is some considerations.
Is that something we do once a year? Or, if you have certain accounts like an E-Trade account or a bank account or something like that, is it like one time you figured it out and you can go update it if necessary?
Right. So what we're trying to do here is just get into the habit that we would do this at least once a year.
Okay.
Right? Just like we kind of think about goal setting once a year. Let's do that in January. Let's set our visions for this year. This is something that you could think about at least once a year. But that's a good point, Sapna. If you just open an account and it's halfway through the year and you've already done a little session where you sat down and thought of all the beneficiaries and things like that. And we'll go through it because I'm going to give you 6 ways that you can update your beneficiaries. But it would be time for you to go ahead and look at that. Whenever there is a change in your financial status, in your family, even like, let's say you got married, you have a child, things like that. So
yeah, I agree. And, sometimes we just open up those accounts and just in a hurry to get them operating, but we really haven't gone through all the settings, and not realize that, oh, I actually didn't put a beneficiary down for, that account. So.
Good point. Good point. So one thing's like, first things first, we're going to establish some accounts, right? But then the next thing is always my thing is always just get started.
Yeah.
And so that's good. If that's you, kudos to you. But then the next thing you want to do is go ahead and go back and revisit. And am I optimizing this plan? Am I getting everything I'm supposed to be getting out of this? And one of those things would be setting up those important beneficiaries. So You might be wondering, well, what the heck is a beneficiary anyways?
That was going to be my question. For
Okay.
those of our viewers and listeners that don't know, what is a beneficiary?
Okay. So yeah. So beneficiary, you've probably heard the term before, but without getting too, dictionary on you, I'm going to say that you can listen to the word and you can almost hear the word benefit in it. Beneficiary, benefit. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how you're going to remember it's a person you're going to designate to benefit from some account that you might have.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that's important is because when you don't set up your own beneficiaries, right? So if you have a bank account, checking, a savings, and you don't tell the bank who will be your beneficiary, then if something happens to you, so upon your death, the state in which you live is going to determine who is going to benefit from your money, who is going to be your beneficiary. And we want control over our money, right? Even after death, we want to say who's going to get our money, where's this asset going to go? And that's the whole point of setting these things up in advance, right? So that way you are in full control of your money, your assets, your finances, even after you pass.
Agreed. Yeah, I want full control over where the assets, are going. And so tell us, how do we do this? And what's sort of like the first point? What would be, now that we know what a beneficiary is, what are some of the steps that you recommend for us to follow?
Okay, great. And before I go into that first one, I want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
The thing I want to say is that we spend so much time, getting our finances organized and doing the right things and saving and investing. So when you build up your wealth, even if it's not a lot, even if you only have a checking account or a savings account, you build these things over time, and then you don't do the other part, the beneficiary. You just might be disappointed to know that even an ex-spouse who you would want nothing to do with nowadays could end up being your beneficiary. And I only say that because I've seen that happen.
Wow.
And current spouses aren't the beneficiaries. It's the ex-spouse. So that's why it's so important.
Wow. I think you might have hit a very important point. Maybe that's just the right incentive for anybody who's, decided to get married again and has completely forgotten
Yes.
that they didn't change their beneficiaries. Oh my gosh, what an important point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and with that being said, a beneficiary can also, it doesn't have to just be a person, it can be an organization.
Yes.
So if you have causes that you're very passionate about, I know I have a friend who is very passionate about animals.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of her beneficiaries, in addition to her spouse, I'm sure she's going to want her spouse to have some benefits from any of her assets, but it would be animal type of organizations and charities and things like that. So, or it could be your bank or your church. So I'm just putting those ideas out there because if you find it hard to think of a person, think about the other things that you're passionate about. It can be an organization or a company, a nonprofit or something like that. Okay, so are you ready to go to number one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so these are the 6 considerations that will help you put your beneficiary designations together and think through this process. So number 1 would be just simply brainstorm and organize. Okay, so you can begin a list of your financial accounts. Like, what do you have? Do you have a checking account? Oh, good. You have 2? Okay, write that down. Just start brainstorming. Get a blank sheet of paper and start remembering what assets, what financial accounts do you have out there? I know it sounds kind of like, oh, that's kind of basic. Can we move on to the next?
Not really.
I mean, you'd be surprised at what I've seen. And we all know you might be one of those people that have left a job and you just totally left your 401k somewhere and you don't really know where it is. But You
Mhm.
think in the back of your mind, when it comes time to when I need it, then I'll go and hunt for it. Now's the time to do it when you're doing your beneficiaries. Otherwise, you're going to leave people trying to hunt for those things, and they might not know, and nobody will benefit from your hard-earned money and preparation.
Yeah, I
So
agree. Yeah, that happens quite a lot with the 401k.
it
You
does.
know, you leave one job and you forget about them, and and if you have happened to have done that bridge work, great. But if you didn't, this is a great time to sort of have your financial hygiene in place and start putting things in order, put your
For
ducks in order.
sure.
Yeah,
For sure. So
excellent.
write it down, brainstorm, organize all the things that you can remember, all your financial assets, accounts, anything that has value, write it down, because you may be able to put a beneficiary to those things. Think about who you would want to have your money in case you died.
Mhm.
And so I do have whenever we do these chats, I'll usually have a resource attached to it. So in this case, I do have a simple worksheet that you can use that will help you organize the name of the company, address, website, phone number, those kinds of things, just to keep yourself organized. And then,
That's useful. That's a
yeah,
good.
yeah. So it helps you kind of think through that. Okay. So once we've done that, we go to number 2, which would be revise as needed, because some of these accounts you already remember setting up beneficiaries. So that's good. But are they still the same people, right? So that's where we go updating and realize, oh my gosh, I still had my ex-spouse listed as my beneficiary. Thank God I did this once a year. So that way I remembered, I sat down and I realized I need to change that.
Yeah, I see why you are encouraging us to do this once a year, because it's almost like, like a house maintenance checklist where
Yep.
you're just making sure that, when we go to winterize our houses, we're kind of checking the pipes and this and that. So it's like it's important to do that, because sometimes what we've done, like an investment account 5 years ago, you don't remember who it is. And maybe that person that you had a beneficiary listed is no more.
Right. That's right. What it could be an ex-spouse, or it could
They
be
might have passed on themselves,
somebody who's exactly passed
like
on.
the parents or something, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's that's why whenever there's a change, it would be great if you remembered
Yeah.
halfway down through the year, and let's say get married, and you remember to do all these things, but when there are these changes happening,
Yeah.
sometimes it is hard to remember all the things to do with that goes along with that change. So a marriage or a divorce, or
Yeah.
now you maybe lost a spouse, so now you're a widow or widower. It is really hard to remember, oh my gosh, I have to do this, that, and the other. But if you just decide once a year, when I'm doing my goal setting or whatever else that you do at the beginning of the year, you remember to let me remember throughout the last year, were there any changes that I would need to change my beneficiaries? That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm seeing that having some sort of a checklist as a tool for, like, like the large transitions in life, the big transitions, it's really needed.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
This is
Wow.
one of
Okay.
those things that would definitely be on that checklist. So
Mhm.
it could be, you've had a child, so now you have an additional potential beneficiary. Maybe you had your other, couple children listed, but now you
Mhm.
have another, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
could be a number of different life changes, even if you've acquired assets. Let's say like you bought a house.
Right.
Hey, that's a
Right.
life change. That's something that you need to think about. The same thing the topic that we're talking about. So changes happen throughout our year.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep up with everything that you need to be doing, but once a
Totally.
year, focus on this
I
specifically and
like that.
fall.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see the real value in this for sure.
Okay, great. And I have one example that came to my mind, which was a friend of mine. she had somebody designated actually for her children, caregiver.
Mm.
And there were changes actually in her friend's life, circumstances where she actually unfortunately began using drugs and those kinds of things. So, those are things that she might have designated that friend initially, but now that friend is not available. Unfortunately, she's an addict right now and she needs to get help, so she needs to withdraw that designation for the caregiver for children, right? And this is not really beneficiary talk, but it's people in your life can change. So that's what we revise. There could have been somebody who was really responsible before that you would have totally picked for to be your beneficiary for your finances and assets, but you might change your decision about that later. So
Right.
yeah.
So like as a guardian, I mean, they would probably have some sort of say in, how their funds are dispersed and what have you. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
you're
So
right. You're right.
okay.
All right. What's next?
Number 3, that's next. So that's learn how to make changes.
Mhm.
So different plans and different, accounts will determine what you're going to do. But the only way to know that, right, is to call that account, that company, that plan, and ask them how you can update your beneficiary. And sometimes it's as simple as filling out a form. Life insurance policy owners need to contact your agent first. So that's something your agent can process and probably make it a little easier for you. But a lot of times, it'll be as simple as filling out a form. You may have to get it notarized, you might, right? So those kinds of things could change and vary depending on what account and what company it's held with. Now, one thing I like to bring up here is that we're using the word beneficiary, and when you're talking about accounts like checkings and savings,
Mhm.
those are still accounts that are financial accounts, right? But they're not using the term beneficiary as much in the banking world as they are using like payable upon death. So
Ooh, okay. I did
that's
not.
what, yeah, or payable on death. So sometimes it will be referred to, and they even have an acronym, POD, POD, payable on death. And so that's the term. If you have these accounts in your bank, credit union, ask about who gets your account, can you update your payable on death
Mm,
information? And then they should point you to the right form.
got it.
You bring
Good.
that.
That's good to know.
Okay. So number 4, this one, again, some of this seems kind of obvious, but I have enough stories to know that it's not so obvious. So at first glance, it might seem basic and obvious, but then when you look a little deeper, you think, yeah, I need to really take this step seriously. So this one would be deciding carefully. What do I mean? I've already given some examples of, deciding carefully who that person's going to be. So
Mm.
um, I have a lot of experience with people who really trusted, let's just say a parent, a single person. Maybe they don't have a spouse, so they're not going to use a spouse. There's no spouse to use as a beneficiary, but then they designate a parent.
Mm.
And they could totally trust that parent with their children, right?
Sure.
But that parent might not be financially savvy or financially responsible and
Yeah.
might have some financial troubles themselves.
Yeah.
So that might not be the person that you designate. Even though you trust them in other ways, your finances might not be one of those ways. So that's why I mean, just
Wait.
decide carefully.
Yeah,
There's no
I
rush to do this, right? You just like think it through.
it's a skill set. It really is. Someone who not everyone, is financially responsible. I think that's a great way to say it. Some people are just not able to manage their finances very well. And if you know that,
Right.
then especially if there's kids involved and there's guardianship and what have you, or there's a college fund or something, like you really want to be very mindful where you are,
Yeah,
where you're giving that kind of, putting those kind of funds in. So
right.
that's
So yeah, and the other thing is, don't let analysis paralysis
yeah,
prevent you from going ahead and designating a beneficiary
right.
or payable on death. Because those things are important for you to do. It's much better for you to make a decision now. Don't rush into it. Take a few days, a week, think about it, do it.
Mhm.
Because the thing is you can always go back and change them. That's the thing. You
That's
set
a
it
good
up,
point.
you can
Yeah.
go and change it. And then the next thing to know is that you deciding now, even if you might change your mind, is better than the state deciding, because the state may have a different order of divvying up your assets and financial accounts than you ever had in mind, right? And so just keep that in mind.
Right.
Don't let analysis paralysis prevent you from doing these things.
Yeah, and I would imagine that is in this day and age, the beneficiary, I know for some of the accounts that I had actually was just done online, and then they just asked for verification of identity, some
Mm-hmm.
sort of ID, and I was able to scan and provide it. And they're like, okay, so just so you know, like it was pretty easy online.
Yeah.
So it's worth looking into.
Yeah, like I said, it could be as easy as that. And depending what type of an account, they could have an extra layer of protection. But um, you know, it's not something that you're gonna do every day. It's once a year, so you can take your time and do those things. Shouldn't be much of a burden. But on the note of deciding carefully, here's the thing. You might be thinking, my children, they'll be my beneficiaries. Maybe you don't have a spouse, or maybe you don't like your spouse enough. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. But, it could be true. I don't know. So, anyways, but when you're deciding carefully and you are considering children, just know that there could be, well, they're just tricky. Children are tricky, right? Because they're minors. And so if they're not 18 years old or older, your beneficiaries that you're thinking about, a guardian may be appointed by the court to manage the assets of
Mhm.
the minor children until they reach legal age. So there's just another little level of complexity there. So
Mhm.
that's something to keep in mind. Also, let's say you do have a loving spouse and loving children, and
Mhm.
you want both of them to be your beneficiary, or you're maybe like kind of like torn, which one should I go with?
Mhm.
Actually, you don't, it's not always a all or nothing, like all your spouse or all your children. Many beneficiary designations allow you to do a
Split it
percent.
out.
Yeah, spread it out. Like, okay, I want 50% to go to the spouse, 25% to go to one of my children, 25% to go to my next child. There we go. There's 100%. So
Yes.
keep that in mind as well.
Good. That's a really good point. And so we're wrapping up. Is there any last point, Geremy?
So we have a couple other points. Know your
Okay.
beneficiaries. I'll speed this one up, but
No, no, you're
we
fine.
were just talking about it. It's kind of what we've already talked about, right? Like know the people, like their financial habits, their skill set. Like you mentioned, it is a skill set, and not all people that don't manage their money correctly doesn't make them bad people. No, that's not
Yeah,
what
it's
we're
just not
saying.
good in that arena.
That skill set. It's a skill
Yes.
set, right? Yeah. So think about those characteristics of the potential beneficiaries, answering three questions. What are their financial needs?
Hmm.
How old and self-sufficient are they? Are they capable to manage money, right? Some basic things to think through. Maybe you're thinking about somebody who's already really, really old. Like maybe that wouldn't be the best person because,
I was just thinking
things
that.
like
Like,
that.
let's say you're thinking of someone who may be 70, right?
Right.
And say, let's say you've passed on and your assets have been passed on to the 70-year-old.
Yes.
Well, what happens in 5 years if they, if they pass away, where does that go? So
Right.
sort of the long-term ripple effect of that is not something I had considered.
Right.
I just thought of my immediate family, but for someone who may not necessarily have that and they're thinking a parent, now that's an interesting. concept, or an aunt or an uncle or somebody.
Yeah, there you go. So lots to think about. And then, so number 6, share with trusted people.
Yeah.
So after you've done all of your brainstorming, you've revised, you looked at who you've had before. Do I really want that person now? And you're thinking about all these things. Who could it be? Their financial position or skill set themselves and everything else. That's you've done your best at that moment with that information and knowledge you have. Now share what you've done, that work, with trusted people. Meaning, let somebody know, maybe it's your neighbor. Hey, I just finished updating my beneficiaries and I just wanted to tell a trusted person, you're my neighbor, we've been friends for 10 years now, that I did that. And should something happen to me, I just want you to know that I designated my oldest daughter as my beneficiary, and all the information she needs is in this file in this location, X file, X location, or in my savings box in at Bank of America. That's enough information, right? So that person's not clueless, because let's face it, some of this stuff is like, we don't really want to talk about it. Sometimes we don't want to talk about what would happen if I died. So you might not want to bring it up, and you don't want it to, or there can be many other reasons why you don't want to bring it up and tell the beneficiaries. But the point is to tell somebody trusted, so that they know to inform people should something happen to you, what your wishes were, that you executed your wishes, you've done your beneficiary designations, and you have that important information, documents in a certain location. So that way we know what you've done, right? Because it's not any good to anybody, any beneficiary, when you've done all this work and nobody knows about it.
Right. And this financial issue, this financial topic is really part of a much larger conversation, that to sort of have it. A friend of mine, 𝙎𝙀𝘎𝙎𝙎, he does the kitchen table topic conversation, and that's about, in the case of, me passing away, this is how I want this handled. This is what I want, like I want to be cremated. This is a conversation. This is just a simple topic, but most of us are not even having that kind of topic, because, and that goes to more about just feeling uncomfortable with the topic of death. And so I think this is a very important topic for us. And if it's the finances that gets us talking about, in case something happens, it's just good to have, because if you think about it, your family, if something were to happen, they're emotionally withdrawn. I mean, they are at probably their worst time in their life. And for them to have to manage all of this, something that is so logical, is probably the last thing on their mind.
Right.
So I think having conversations around this topic, and just like an emergency plan, like, if there's a fire, what window are we escaping? Like, it's one of these things that if we can get used to, just at least the older children, I mean, the young ones I understand, but the spouse or a trusted relative to be able to say, hey, the will is here, these are here, the beneficiary is already designated. Like, I think this is something that we just need to get used to speaking about, and to say it's just a plan, just like, like we have insurance, this is just a plan. And to not have so much emotion that is that surrounds, and really the emotion is fear. So from a mindset point of view, it's really the idea of fear, that fear of death and all that really prevents us from even going into this topic financially, as well as
that's right.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you if, I have a handout, I have a couple handouts. So it will list the 6 ways how to update your beneficiary. That's one handout, and the other one was the beneficiaries worksheet, where you can access it with this recording. You'll have a link to click, and you can go access that. But I was going to say, if you find yourself not being able to do that, knowing that you should do it, but you can't emotionally do that, that's a mindset thing that Sapna could work with you on.
Yeah.
So that your finances will be good by the time you're done with your work with her, and you can break through the layers of whatever fears and those kinds of things that are holding you back.
Yeah, I find that in our finances, there's the things that we need to do, and you're quite the expert on that. That here's are all the considerations you're not making, and we forget how much the mindset and of just like being an athlete, you need to be able to, let's say, throw the ball and throw the ball very far, and to be able to, you have to be able to run. Like there's things you have to be able to do. And then there's also the mental game. So it's the physical game and the mental game. And I think that's what I love, that you and I come together and we're here to support women. So yes. Thank you so much, Geremy. I really appreciate the tools. I know that our viewers and our listeners are really going to benefit from that. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks and with a new topic. So thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.